Today, I have the privilege to interview Anna Penner. She is a parent of three kids. She is also an anti-homophobia educator and a birth and postpartum doula. In this interview, we're talking about her transition to parenthood, her experience of undiagnosed postpartum depression, and how it connects to her queer identity. Hi, Anna.
Hi, how are you?
Doing good, and you?
I'm doing well.
Trying to adjust with school at home with the kids.
Me too.
It's quite something, but we're getting it. We're getting it. Thank you so much for accepting to do this interview with me.
Oh, I'm happy to.
Very happy. So, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Anna. I use she, her pronouns. I am a parent of three kids. I am an anti-homophobia educator, and I'm also a birth and postpartum doula.
Excellent. Yes, so today I wanted to interview you, especially to talk about your transition to parenthood. So, can you tell us how you were picturing parenthood before having your first baby? So, what were you thinking you would be experiencing once your baby would be born?
Um, I think I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was. I think I thought babies are small, you sort of just bring them with you where you go, and maybe things get trickier later. But I really thought I would have a sort of instant sense of what to do and that it would be an easy transition, or maybe not easy, but easier transition.
Okay. And what were people around you telling you about the transition to parenthood?
Not too many people were telling me about the transition to parenthood because before I had kids, I wasn't really in a community of parents. I consider my primary community to be queer and trans community. And while, of course, there are many queer and trans parents, they weren't necessarily the people I was mostly networked with. So I talked to a couple of parents about their experiences beforehand, but not really to the same degree that maybe I should have, or maybe that I would have if I were a straight person interacting with a straight community of peers.
I see. So you mentioned to me previously that after the birth of your first, you struggle with undiagnosed postpartum depression.
Hmm.
Can you share with us this postpartum experience, like your symptoms, your feelings, or the most difficult things going through this hardship?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it started pretty quickly for me. I would describe my first birth in some ways for me personally as being traumatic. So it was a
Mhm.
difficult birth. It was a long induction followed by a C-section. C-section. I didn't feel like I had necessarily a lot of control about the experience, which was nothing to do with my healthcare providers. It was to
Mhm.
do with my own lack of knowledge and experience.
Okay.
And because of that birth experience, during which I felt quite afraid, and then the physical and emotional healing from that, accompanied with having a new baby, I felt pretty traumatized by it all. I felt very unhappy with how things had gone. And then I found actual parenthood hard. So I found feeding hard. I found the lack of sleep hard. I found the lack of community hard. I found the hormonal shifts hard, and ended up feeling quite anxious and depressed, though I didn't have language to describe that, or
Mhm.
didn't know that what I was experiencing was postpartum depression and also to a degree postpartum anxiety. It wasn't until much later, really years later, that that shifted for me. So the first thing that happened was that a friend of mine was talking to me about her experience immediately postpartum. And she was describing what she was thinking and feeling. And I kept saying, oh, that's normal. That's just what you feel. That's what it's like to have a baby. And then she got diagnosed with postpartum
Oh,
depression. And I said, okay, hold on, wait a
oh,
minute.
yeah,
Maybe this isn't normal. Maybe this isn't how it has to be. Maybe there's a different way to experience new parenthood. The second thing that happened was that I had my second baby. And my second baby was born just under 3 years after my first baby. And it was a very different experience. So it was an uninduced labor. It was a really quick labor. It was a vaginal birth post C section.
I see.
And the recovery was a lot faster, things were a lot smoother, and I didn't experience postpartum depression. And not experiencing it and not having that feeling really showed me that there was a different way to experience
Wow.
pregnancy, birth, and postpartum.
I see. Okay. So I guess one question, like, I'm guessing that before having your first child, you were not very aware of the symptoms of postpartum depression, or you didn't know much about postpartum mood and anxiety disorder?
You know, I'm sure I knew a bit because
Okay.
I think in general culture there's a broad sort of vague
Mm-hmm.
discussion of postpartum depression, less postpartum anxiety, and that it's something that you can experience. But because I hadn't experienced depression more broadly in my life, and I didn't really know what to name it as, I didn't recognize that what I was feeling was postpartum depression. As I
Mm-hmm.
said, it was only through having a different experience later on that I realized that it wasn't just the default post-birth
Yeah.
way to be, or the default way to experience having a baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember in my own experience when I experienced like postpartum depression, even though my psychiatrist told me there is a chance, because what happened after birth, I had a manic episode, and then 2 months after, I had depression. But my psychiatrist had told me there's a good chance that it will have a depression because you went through a manic episode, and he told me about the symptoms. But it's interesting that going through it didn't ring a bell right away. Like it was like, okay, I'm not feeling good. That must be just my new reality as a mom. Or like
Exactly.
as a parent, this is hard. I'm lacking sleep. I all those negative feelings that I was having was like, okay, probably it's just my new reality. And when it got to a point where it was bad, then I was like, okay, I cannot handle this anymore. And then I told my husband about it. I said, I want to cry all the time. This is too difficult. And it was like, you need to talk to your psychiatrist. And then my psychiatrist said, yeah, you're having depression. So in the midst of it, I could not recognize it.
Absolutely, and I think it's similar. It's easier to look at the external factors and just say, parenthood is hard, this is terrible, and not something is going on in me that is making it harder and is making it more difficult. Because
Mhm.
parenthood is hard.
Yeah.
Parenthood, if you have a dream birth, a dream postpartum period, a dream baby, it is objectively hard. But there are things that make it harder that we don't always know how to name for ourselves. I think also for me, there was a real need to just insist that I was fine, even
Mm.
when I wasn't. And I think that is something that is really part of the culture of being a parent, maybe the culture of being a mother, being a woman more broadly. I don't know. But where you just have to say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
And never say that, you know what, I'm actually not okay.
Yeah.
And I think that actually connects to queer identity in a particular way, where there's this real need in queer community to say, we are okay, our kids are okay. Because
Mm.
for so long we've been told there's something wrong with us,
Yeah.
and we won't be fit parents, and we won't have okay kids. So there ends up being this sort of need to overcompensate and say, I'm fine, this is great, I'm a super parent, I have a super baby, and to name actually things are not okay
Mm.
is in a way to put something negative not only onto yourself, but more broadly your community and your community's value of parenthood, or how people value you and your community as parents. And that made it harder.
Wow. So I guess there's a feeling of wanting to stay strong or show that you're strong going through something difficult.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you answer my next question. How does this experience connect with your queer identity? So, yeah, I think
Yeah,
it.
I think that's one of the main ways in which it connects with my queer identity, though it's not something that I could have named or put into words at the time that I was saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. I think it is connected and it is relevant. I think the other piece is around access to community.
Hmm.
Because for me, one of the really big things that happened after I had a baby was that community shifted for me. You know, when you
Mhm.
have a new baby, you can't just go out and see your friends, hang out, go to the same places you might have previously. And one thing I knew for my own mental wellness, and that's still true for my mental wellness, is connection with other people and connection with community. So if that's something for you, that's true for you and you're straight, well, maybe you go to a mom's group and feel, oh, this is a community. These are people I connect
Mhm.
to. This is great. But I would go to those groups, and I did go to all of those groups. And every greeting would be, hey, mamas, hey,
Mm,
ladies, how's
yeah.
it going, girls? Let's talk about our husbands and what they're doing. And while that can be great if that is a point of connection for you, it isn't a point of connection for me, and instead was a point of further isolation.
Exactly.
So I felt like I could be in space with these other parents. I could form good bonds with these other parents, but I didn't have the same feel of community or shared identity that maybe would have been helpful to me.
Hmm. This is so important, like to be able to connect and to feel um, that we are recognized for who we are.
Absolutely. And that was one of the biggest shifts postpartum for me with my other two kids.
Mm,
So, as well as having a 7-year-old, I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And with my younger two children, I was a lot more intentional around building
mm,
community after they were born. And I also had more access, knew sort of where to find community, knew other people who were becoming parents because I was one of the first people in my peer group,
mm.
my existing group of friends and acquaintances to have babies. But because I knew other people the other two times around, I didn't just have to go to a baby group and hope there was space for me. I
Mm.
could go to a baby group with my friends and we could make space for ourselves. Or we
Okay.
could just skip the baby group entirely and have coffee. And that definitely has shifted, obviously, with COVID-19. My youngest child was 10 weeks old when COVID hit. So there hasn't been the same access to community. But even just virtual community, even just having people I'm connected to um, more broadly who do share my identities and experiences has made it feel a lot less isolating to be a parent in this time.
Good. Because yeah, my question was like, how do you go through this challenge? You know, it's a postpartum period plus COVID, which adds up like another challenge.
Yeah, it was definitely a big thing to go through. I feel really grateful that my baby was born and sort of spent that fourth trimester in a pre-COVID world, or in a world that was pre-COVID to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was a big shift when suddenly I couldn't go and see my friends and I couldn't be in space with them. Um, and I felt pretty upset and pretty depressed in the spring, and I kept thinking, wow, am I going through postpartum depression again? Is this
Mm-hmm.
postpartum depression? And I, at a certain point, to recognize, no, that this time it is actually just the world, and the fact
Yes.
that it was a really isolating time to suddenly be afraid, be worried about health, to be taking care of my baby with fewer supports than I otherwise would have been, to lose any access to childcare or family supports or friends, even just to have a friend hold the baby and comment on how cute she is, is a big thing to lose. And then the third piece was that suddenly I was taking care of my other kids full time as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, not really having any of that time for a postpartum period where it was just, you know, here you are, your recovery is done. Now it's taking care of other people.
Mm-hmm. It's hard. Yeah. So how I want to talk about your partner. Like your difficult postpartum experience had an impact on you for sure, but how like did your difficult postpartum experience have an impact on your partner?
I'm sure it did. But my need to say how much I was fine extended to my partner as
Mm,
well. That if my partner would have asked, or if my partner did ask, I don't know, it was 7 years ago and I was depressed, I don't remember. Um, are you fine? Do you need anything? I would have just said, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine.
Mm.
Again, defaulting to that responsive fine. But I'm sure it was a challenge, and I'm sure that she was also going through her own adjustment to the postpartum period. I don't think there are a lot of resources and supports for non-gestational parents out there,
Mhm.
by which I mean parents who didn't carry the pregnancy. Um, Even fathers, but to then be a non-gestational parent who is a queer parent and another mother to the children, I think adds another layer to it as well. So
Totally.
I think even though I'm partnered, in some ways I was experiencing those feelings in isolation.
Mhm. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about your other postpartum periods. So from what I'm understanding from what you're saying, you didn't experience postpartum depression. So the transition was easier when you had other kids. So did you feel more like you prepare, like let's say for your second baby, like did you prepare in a different way for that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my preparation was more around the birth and the postpartum period. And I think it was a shift in mentality around the birth.
Mm,
So people make birth plans, and you see things on birth plans like, do you want an epidural or not? Do you want the lights dimmed? Whatever it is. Do you want to avoid the use of vacuum forceps? But for me, it was shifting from that sort of planning about the details to planning more about the feelings. Like,
okay.
I want to name what my needs are in that space.
Hmm.
I want to do whatever I can to not feel afraid as I'm giving birth. I want to hold my baby right away because that was something I was too scared to do after my first was born. And by naming my birth plan really around the outcomes and less about the actual procedures, I was able to um, develop a plan that felt good to me, regardless of what exit that baby took. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I felt like they were things that could have been applied to a vaginal birth or a C-section in that case.
I see.
In terms of the actual postpartum period, I think maybe having my hardest delivery in postpartum with my first was a blessing in disguise, where I was prepared for the worst when my second baby was born. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
sort of just like, this is terrible, but now I have the bigger picture where I know things will get better. It will be okay. I have friends who are also having babies. When things are terrible, I'll just rely on them. Um, and then things weren't terrible, so it was just a nice surprise.
Wow. Yeah, because for me, like, yes, I had a postpartum bipolar disorder, bipolar disorder postpartum onset, and I had psychotic features too. So it was like a very traumatic experience to go through. So when we finally decide to have another kid, like for me, that transition, that postpartum transition was like, okay, I really need to think about it and, be more ready because there was a chance of experiencing the same thing again. So we did plan in a different way, like more. I remember my first planning a lot for the birth, but the second time I planned more for the postpartum period to make sure, I would have enough support, I would have time to rest, and, all those things that would make the transition easier. And actually I was blessed, like I had a very good experience the second time, so I didn't have any relapse. But it's interesting the way I changed my perspective on getting ready for that second baby coming.
hmm I think one thing that shifted with me for my third baby was it was the first time I had addressed my postpartum depression with my midwives. So
Mm-hmm.
in the various questions they ask when they ask about mental health, I think with my second, because I still hadn't named my postpartum depression from my first, I had still just said it was fine, it's fine. With my third, I talked about that experience, and I think that also let my care providers know to be checking in on that as well, which was supportive.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, of course. And me too with my midwives. I told they knew they knew what happened the first time. So she helped me kind of plan also for the birth and making sure that I was ready to because my first birth was very difficult as well. I wouldn't say traumatic, but very hard and difficult and different than what I was expecting because I
hmm
was planning for a home birth and we ended up at the hospital, a vacuum delivery and almost a C-section kind of thing. So it was very different than what I had expected. My expectations were so different. So
hmm
for the second time, she says, don't put your expectation too high and, she helped me to have more of a balanced way of thinking about my birth, and I think that helped too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I really agree. I mean, my third birth was a C-section, a planned C-section this time. And I think I had really at that point been able to shift my thinking beyond just whether the baby is born vaginally or is a C-section to more broadly thinking about like how can any birth be a good birth? What can we do to make that birth good for ourselves? And I think that is really individual, but I would say in many ways, my third birth, a C-section, was my most positive birth experience. So I think the trauma of the first birth was really connected more to the feelings and experiences around it and not specifically to having a C-section. Because any birth can be a good birth, any birth can be a traumatic birth. It just depends on what happens around it.
Yes, yes. And how we interpret, yeah, that's a word.
Interpret?
Yeah. So for me, like, I know that having a vacuum, using a vacuum for delivery could be traumatic for someone. In my case, I don't think it was. It was a very different of what I was expecting, but I cannot really say that it was traumatic necessarily for me, but I can totally understand that it could be traumatic for somebody else.
Absolutely.
In their own experience. Yes. What are your advices for 2S LGBTQ parents who are going through a challenging transition into parenthood?
Do what you can to find your community. And I think that is a challenging thing even in non-COVID times, particularly if you aren't already connected to 2S LGBTQ communities, particularly if you aren't living in an urban center where there might be programming. But there are ways to do it even through things like social media. There are large communities of queer and trans parents online. I've found a lot of support through those. I know there are resources, blogs, columns and zines, lots of different ways to connect with other people's experiences and stories. I think for a lot of straight parents, maybe they have access to communities of elders, communities of parents who have gone before them, who can share their stories and share their experiences. And for some 2S LGBTQ people, that might be their experience. For others, we don't always have access to our families of origin or families of parents outside our families of origin. So if there's that absence in your story, where can you find stories? Where can you find experiences and points of connection? Because birth and pregnancy and having a new baby can be really isolating, but there are ways to find community. And there are ways to find community for you if you are queer or trans as well.
Cool. And as birth professionals, and because I know that there will be some birth professionals listening to this interview, and other people who want to help, like, how can we best support 2S LGBTQ expecting new parents into their transition to parenthood?
I think listening to people's individual stories and experiences and making space for their individual identities. We aren't a monolithic community at all. Everyone's identity, everyone's story, everyone's journey to parenthood is really individual. So asking questions, asking people's pronouns is a really good place to start. Sharing your own pronouns is a really good place to start. If there's a term that you don't understand, look it up, do your research, do your work. As much as it's important for you to know about the physical aspects of bringing a child into this world, it's as important to know about the aspects of identity that impact bringing a child into this world. So do that work and ask your clients to share their stories and experiences when you want that information or need that information.
Cool. Thank you. Any other thing you would like to say or share?
I can't think of anything right now.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and answering my questions. And yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for talking to me, and I'm really happy to have chatted with you today.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye.
Have a great afternoon.